The scent of expensive lilies always makes me feel like I'm at a funeral. Tonight, the funeral was mine. I stood in the narrow service corridor of the Grand Hyatt, the linoleum cold and unforgiving beneath my designer heels. To my left, a stack of plastic bread crates leaned against a stained concrete wall. To my right, the heavy oak double doors that led to the grand ballroom. Through those doors, I could hear it. The muffled, rhythmic roar of the elite, the sound of 300 people who mattered. Laughing at jokes that weren't funny, clinking crystal glasses filled with vintage champagne. It was the gala of the century. The night that was supposed to change our lives. My husband, Mark, had tucked me back here 15 minutes ago. "Elena, wait here," he had whispered. He hadn't looked me in the eyes when he said it. He was busy adjusting his silk tie in a nearby mirror, his face a mask of practiced, corporate ambition. His hand had gripped my shoulder just a little too hard, not a gesture of affection, but a physical anchor, holding me in place so I wouldn't ruin his moment. "This merger with Sterling Group is delicate," he'd continued, his voice low and urgent. "Julian Sterling, the CEO, he's old school. Formidable. He likes to see the man first, the business second. If he sees me with a distraction like you right away, it ruins the pulse. It ruins the image of the tireless, singular workhorse I've built. Stay here. I'll come get you when the signatures are dry. Just stay out of sight." I believed him. I always believed him. That was my first mistake, thinking that my invisibility was a strategic sacrifice for our shared future. So, I waited. 5 minutes passed. I adjusted the strap of my gown, a deep navy silk that Mark had picked out because it was unobtrusive. 10 minutes. A waiter carrying a silver tray of Wagyu sliders brushed past me. He stopped, looked at my expensive dress, then at the mop bucket behind me, and gave me a look of such profound, lingering pity that I had to look at my shoes. 20 minutes. My feet began to ache. The hum of the party grew louder, more boisterous. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I decided to peek. Just a sliver. Just to see if he was almost done. I pressed my face to the narrow gap between the oak doors. The ballroom was a sea of gold and black. And there, in the center of the light, stood Mark. He wasn't talking to old-school board members. He wasn't looking for Julian Sterling. He was standing near the ice sculpture with Sarah, his senior analyst. He was laughing. It wasn't the tight, stressed laugh he gave me at dinner. It was a genuine, warm, predatory sound. His hand wasn't on her shoulder. It was resting on the small of her back, his fingers tracing the line of her spine with a familiarity that made my stomach turn into a knot of cold lead. "Where's your better half tonight, Mark?" a colleague asked, clapping him on the back as they walked by. Mark didn't miss a beat. He took a slow sip of his champagne, leaned in, and smiled at Sarah. "Elena?" Mark chuckled. The sound was casual, dismissive. "Oh, she couldn't make it. Migraine. She's much more comfortable at home anyway. To be honest, she's not really built for this level of social pressure. She's a homebody. A bit of a fragile soul." The group laughed. Sarah leaned into his chest, her voice a sharp, audible stage whisper. "Poor Elena. I suppose some people just aren't meant for the spotlight." I stepped back from the door. My heart wasn't just beating. It was hammering against my ribs, a panicked animal trying to escape a cage. He hadn't just left me in a hallway. He had erased me. He had turned the woman who helped him write his speeches, the woman who managed his house and his heart for 7 years, into a fragile excuse. I was the secret shame he kept in the dark so he could shine in the light. I couldn't stay there. The air in the service corridor felt like it was disappearing. I turned and walked deeper into the back of the hotel, past the industrial kitchens, past the laundry bins, wanting to find a bathroom anywhere I could cry without a waiter watching me. I rounded a sharp corner, my eyes blurred with tears, and slammed into a wall of dark, expensive wool. "Careful," a deep, calm voice said. Strong hands caught my elbows, steadying me. I looked up, gasping. Dark eyes. A face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who didn't believe in mercy. It was him. Julian Sterling. The CEO. The old-school titan Mark was so afraid would see me. He didn't look at my dress. He didn't look at my jewelry. He looked straight into my eyes. He saw the smudge of mascara, the way my lower lip was trembling, the way I was clutching my clutch bag like a shield. "You're Mark's wife," he said. It wasn't a question. I was just leaving. I stammered, trying to pull away. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be back here. He didn't let go of my elbows. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. He blocked the entire hallway, his presence filling the cramped, industrial space until the walls seemed to shrink. He tilted his head, a strange, unreadable expression crossing his face, something between curiosity and disgust. He told the room you were in bed with a fever, Julian said quietly. And yet, here you are. Standing among the crates of cheap wine and laundry bags. I couldn't speak. The humiliation was no longer just an emotion. It was a physical weight in my throat, choking me. I've been searching for you, Elena, Julian whispered. My breath hitched. I had never met this man. I was a homemaker, from the suburbs. He was the man who bought and sold companies over breakfast. You have? Yes, he said, stepping an inch closer. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and cold rain. Because I've been watching Mark for months. I knew he was a liar. I just didn't realize he was a fool, too. He reached out. For a second, I thought he was going to hurt me. Instead, his thumb caught a stray tear on my cheek before it could fall. His skin was warm. Go home, Elena, Julian said. His voice was like velvet over gravel. Don't let him see you tonight. If you stay, you're his victim. If you leave now, you're his problem. He stepped aside, opening the path to the exit. Wait, I whispered. Why tell me this? Julian looked back at me, his eyes dark and inscrutable. Because I hate seeing a high-value asset being wasted by someone who doesn't know how to manage it. I ran. I didn't go back for my coat. I didn't call Mark. I walked out the service entrance and hailed an Uber. As I sat in the back of the car, watching the gold lights of the Hyatt fade into the rainy gray of the city, a cold, crystalline realization settled over me. Mark hadn't just hidden me tonight. He had been building a cage for me for years, brick by brick, lie by lie. And I had been helping him do it. I looked down at my wedding ring. It sparkled under the streetlights. If I had known what they were truly planning, if I had known that tonight was only the beginning of their cruelty, I would have left that night. I would have vanished. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because Julian Sterling was right about one thing. I was an asset, and it was time I started acting like one. To understand how I ended up in a service hallway, you have to understand who I was before Mark broke me. I wasn't always fragile. When I met Mark in our senior year of college, I was the one with the 4 gigapascals. I was the one with the internship at the top law firm in the city. Mark was the boy in the back of the lecture hall with the crooked smile and the desperate ambition. He didn't have my grades, but he had a hunger that I mistook for passion. We're going to be a power couple, Elle, he'd whisper while we studied in the library. You're the brains, I'm the face. We'll conquer this city. I believed in that, I poured my energy into his career. When he got his first entry-level job at a brokerage firm, I spent my weekends editing his reports. When he struggled with his licensing exams, I made the flashcards and stayed up until 3 a.m. quizzing him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my goals became his goals. My success became his support system. Just for a few years, honey, he'd say. Let me get established. Then it'll be your turn. But my turn never came. Each promotion he got was followed by a new reason why I needed to stay in the background. The partners' wives are all stay-at-home moms, Elena. It looks better for the culture if you're available for the charity events. I need the house to be a sanctuary, Elle. I can't come home to your work stress too. I traded my law degree for a collection of high-end cookbooks and a calendar full of his appointments. I convinced myself that I was the silent engine of his success. I thought that by making myself small, I was making our love big. By the 5th year of marriage, I had forgotten how to speak for myself. I waited for his cues. I wore the clothes he liked. I stopped seeing the friends who asked too many questions about why I wasn't working. The red flags were there. They were always there. Like the time he lost my car keys on the day of my big gallery opening. Or the time he accidentally deleted the files for the freelance consulting project I was trying to start. I'm so sorry, Elle, he'd say, looking genuinely distressed. I'm just so overwhelmed with the Sterling account. I'm losing my mind. And I would forgive him. I would comfort him for hurting me. I didn't realize that Mark wasn't overwhelmed. He was calculating. He was eroding my independence bit by bit, until I was nothing more than a ghost in a navy silk dress, standing in a hallway, waiting for permission to exist. But tonight, the ghost had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Tonight, I saw the way he looked at Sarah. As the Uber pulled up to our darkened suburban home, a house I had decorated with every ounce of my soul, I didn't feel like crying anymore. I felt a strange, cold humming in my veins. I walked inside, kicked off my heels, and went to Mark's home office. I sat in his leather chair. I looked at the photos on his desk, me and him in Tuscany. Me and him at his sister's wedding. I looked at my face in those photos. I looked like I was fading. I opened his desk drawer. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to touch his things, to remind myself that he was real and not just a monster I'd invented in a hallway. Under a stack of business cards, I found a burner phone. It was silver. Sleek. I picked it up. It wasn't locked. The last message sent was to a number labeled S. She's in the hallway. We have 2 hours. Meet me in the suite after the toast. My hands didn't shake. That was the most terrifying part. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I walked upstairs, took off the navy dress and put on my softest pajamas. I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling. An hour later, I heard his car pull into the driveway. I heard the front door open. I heard him humming a tune, the same tune he'd been humming at the gala. He came into the bedroom, moving quietly, thinking I was asleep. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. He smelled like champagne and Sarah's perfume. "I'm so sorry I missed the gala, honey," I whispered, my voice thick with fake sleep. "How was it?" Mark paused. I could feel his eyes on me in the dark. "It was boring, Elle," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Total waste of time. I wish you could have been there, but I'm glad you rested. We'll make it up to you tomorrow." He turned away to head to the shower. "Mark?" I called out. "Yeah? Did you meet Julian Sterling?" There was a split-second beat of silence. "No. He didn't show up. Typical eccentric billionaire. Anyway, go back to sleep." He lied. He lied about the meeting. He lied about the night. He lied about everything. And as the sound of the shower started, I realized that Julian Sterling wasn't the only one who had been searching for me. I was searching for me, too. And I was starting to find her. If I had known what they were planning, how they intended to strip me of the house, the bank accounts, and my very reputation, I would have run that night. But I didn't run. Because revenge is a dish best served cold, and I was just starting to feel the chill. The next morning, the sun crawled across our bedroom floor in long, mocking streaks of gold. I watched it from the bed, my eyes dry and heavy. Mark was already gone. He always left early on Mondays, the grind, he called it. He'd left a note on his pillow. "You looked so peaceful sleeping. Didn't want to wake you. Coffee is in the pot. Love you, M." I picked up the note. I felt the weight of the paper, the familiar slant of his handwriting. For 7 years, these notes had been my anchors. Today, it felt like a ransom note. I got up and walked through our house. This was the normal life. Every corner of this home was a testament to my devotion. The curated gallery wall in the hallway, photos of us in Paris, at his firm's holiday party, at the lake house, the hand-woven rugs, the kitchen, stocked with organic ingredients because Mark had a sensitive stomach. I had spent my 30s becoming the perfect curator of a life I didn't actually own. I poured a cup of coffee, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. His way. I realized I didn't even remember how I liked mine. I had been drinking his coffee for so long that his taste had become my reality. I sat at the breakfast nook and closed my eyes, letting the memory of the normal life wash over me. I needed to remember the red flags I had ignored. I needed to see the blueprint of how I'd been dismantled. It started with the small suggestions. 2 years ago, I had been offered a junior partnership at the firm where I'd been doing freelance legal consulting. It was the break I'd been waiting for since I put my career on hold. I remember the dinner that night. I had cooked his favorite lamb chops with rosemary. I was glowing. "Mark, they offered it to me." "The partnership," I said, my voice vibrating with excitement. Mark had paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just set the fork down and took a slow, deliberate sip of wine. "Wow, Elle," he said softly. That's a lot of responsibility. Are you sure you're ready for that? I mean, with my travel schedule increasing and the house, you've been so stressed lately." I just worry about your health. Your migraines have been getting worse. I don't have migraines, Mark, I said, confused. I've had 2 headaches in a year. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His grip was warm, fatherly. Exactly. 2 that I know of. But I see the way you look at the end of the day. You're exhausted. And now you want to add a 60-hour work week. I love you too much to watch you burn out, Elena. Why don't you just take it easy? Focus on the charity board. It's more your pace. I had argued. For a week, I fought him. But then, things started happening. My laptop charger would go missing on mornings I had big meetings, my alarm clock wouldn't go off. Once, Mark accidentally told the firm I was taking a leave of absence for personal family reasons before I had even made a decision. I thought I was helping Elle. He'd cried when I confronted him, looking devastated. You were crying in your sleep. I panicked. I just wanted to protect you. Eventually, I stopped fighting. It was easier to give in than to deal with the protection. I told the firm I couldn't take the position. I told myself I was being a good wife. I was actually being an obedient prisoner. I walked into his office again. The burner phone was gone. He must have taken it with him. I looked at the trash can. It was empty. Mark was meticulous. He never left a trail. But as I turned to leave, my foot caught on the edge of the rug. I stumbled, grabbing the edge of the heavy mahogany desk. A small, black leather-bound book fell from the side shelf. It wasn't a journal. It was a ledger. I opened it. My heart skipped a beat. It was a list of names. Dates. Numbers. Sarah, 5 or 0, necklace. Sarah, 7,200, hotel. Sarah, Decoin 1,500, lease deposit. My breath hitched. The necklace I saw at the gala. It was right there. But it wasn't just Sarah. There were other names. The consultant, $10,000, the auditor, $15,000. Mark wasn't just having an affair. He was buying people. He was building a network of loyalty that had nothing to do with love or business, and everything to do with power. And then I saw it. At the very bottom of the page. Elena, $0. Total asset control. The room felt like it was spinning. Total asset control. He wasn't just my husband. He was my manager. He had calculated my value down to a zero-sum game. I remembered 3 months ago. Mark had asked me to sign some standard insurance papers. Just some updates for the estate planning, honey, he'd said, flipping the pages quickly. Just sign where the tabs are. I've already vetted it with the lawyers. I hadn't read them. Why would I? He was my husband. He was the man who left me notes on my pillow. I realized now that I probably hadn't signed insurance papers. I had signed my own death warrant financially, legally, or both. I heard a sound downstairs. The front door. My heart jumped into my throat. Mark shouldn't be home. I shoved the ledger back onto the shelf exactly where it had been. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath and walked to the top of the stairs. It wasn't Mark. It was a man in a delivery uniform. He was holding a massive bouquet of lilies. White lilies. Elena Vance, he asked. Yes, I said, walking down the stairs, my legs feeling like jelly. These just came in. No card. Just a delivery instruction. I took the flowers. They were heavy. The scent was overpowering, that funeral smell again. I searched through the petals. No note. Nothing. But then I saw it. Tucked deep inside the plastic wrapping was a small silver thumb drive. I went back to the kitchen, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the drive. I pulled out my old, dusty laptop, the one Mark told me was broken but I'd kept in the back of the pantry just in case. I plugged it in. A single folder appeared. For the asset. I clicked it. It was a video file. High definition. No sound at first. It was a security feed from a hotel room. The Hyatt. Last night. The camera was positioned high in the corner. I saw Mark walk into the room. He looked triumphant. He threw his tuxedo jacket onto the bed. Then, Sarah walked in. She was wearing the red dress I had seen in the hallway. She looked at the camera, then at Mark. Did she see us? Sarah asked. Her voice was crystal clear. Mark laughed. Elena? Please. She's probably sitting in that service hallway right now, crying into her hands like a good little martyr. I'll go rescue her in an hour. Tell her the merger is signed. And she'll spend the next week thanking me for letting her stay in the building. Sarah climbed onto the bed, her fingers playing with the diamond necklace. And the papers? Did she sign the transfer? Mark nodded, sitting down beside her. She signed everything. She thinks it's a life insurance policy. By next month, the house, the offshore accounts, and the sterling shares will all be in my name or yours. She'll have the clothes on her back and a very confusing divorce settlement. Sarah kissed him. What about Sterling? He's smart, Mark. If he finds out you're liquidating the assets before the merger closes. Sterling won't find out, Mark snapped. He doesn't even know she exists. To him, I'm the rising star. To him, Elena is just a ghost. The video cut to black. I sat there in the silence of my perfect kitchen. The man I had loved for 7 years hadn't just cheated on me. He was planning to erase me. He was going to strip me of everything and leave me with nothing but the fragile reputation he'd spent years building for me. If I fought him now, he'd use my migraines and my unstable mental state against me. He had the money. He had the lawyers. He had the total asset control. I looked at the lilies on the counter. Julian Sterling sent these. He had to have. He was the only one who knew I was in that hallway. He was the only one who called me an asset. Why was he helping me? Was he a savior? Or was he just a different kind of predator? I didn't have time to figure that out. I looked at the clock. 10:15 a.m. Mark would be at his weekly strategy meeting. Sarah would be with him. I grabbed my purse. I didn't take any clothes. I didn't take any jewelry. I took my passport, the thumb drive, and the burner phone I had found in his desk. I'd swiped it back when I realized he'd left it in his gym bag by the door. I walked out of the house. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked at the roses I had planted last spring. They were just starting to bloom. I realized that I wasn't going to a lawyer. I wasn't going to the police. I was going to find Julian Sterling. If Mark wanted to play the game of total asset control, I was going to show him what happens when the asset starts making its own moves. Looking back, that was the first warning I ignored. Not the affair, not the lies. The warning was the flowers. White lilies. The flower of the dead. I wasn't just leaving my marriage. I was burying the woman I used to be. And as I drove toward the city, I realized that the normal life I had fought so hard to keep was never actually alive to begin with. The Sterling building was a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the very belly of the clouds. It was cold, imposing, and utterly indifferent to the woman standing in the lobby with a thumb drive clutched in her palm like a holy relic. I had spent 7 years being the plus one. I knew how to navigate a lobby. I knew how to smile at a receptionist until they felt guilty for saying no. But today, my smile felt like a cracked mask. I'm here to see Julian Sterling, I said. My voice sounded thin, echoing off the marble floors. The receptionist, a woman with hair so sleek it looked like polished obsidian, didn't even look up from her screen. Does Mr. Sterling have you in his calendar? No, I said. Tell him the hidden asset is here. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked up, her eyes scanning my face, my slightly wrinkled clothes, the desperation I was trying so hard to tuck behind my ears. She picked up the phone. A 30-second conversation followed, consisting mostly of I see and yes, sir. Floor 64, she said, her voice dropping an octave in respect. The private elevator is to your right. The 64th floor didn't look like an office. It looked like a library at the end of the world. No cubicles, no ringing phones. Just the smell of old paper and the hum of a high-end air filtration system. Julian Sterling was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to me. He was silhouetted against the gray city skyline, looking like a king surveying a kingdom he was bored with. You're late, Elena, he said, not turning around. Late for what? I asked. I didn't know we had an appointment. We've had an appointment since the moment you stepped into that hallway last night. He turned slowly. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. Just a black turtleneck and charcoal trousers. He looked even more dangerous in casual clothes. Did you like the lilies? They smelled like a grave, I said. Julian smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who appreciates the spirit of the prey. Exactly. To build something new, you have to acknowledge that the old version is dead. Have you acknowledged that yet? Or are you still hoping Mark will walk through that door and tell you it was all a big misunderstanding? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to his desk, a massive slab of petrified wood, and set the thumb drive down. I saw the video, I whispered. I saw what he's doing. He's liquidating the assets I signed over. He's planning to leave me with nothing. Julian didn't touch the drive. He kept his eyes on mine. He's not just leaving you with nothing, Elena. He's setting you up to take the fall. Those insurance papers you signed? They weren't just asset transfers, they were indemnity waivers. If the Sterling merger goes south due to financial irregularities, Mark is currently creating the paper trail leads directly to your signature. He gets the cash, you get the indictment. The floor felt like it had disappeared. I had to grab the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. I thought the betrayal was about Sarah. I thought it was about money. I didn't realize it was about my freedom. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice cracking. You're the CEO. If Mark is stealing from the merger, shouldn't you be calling the police? Why help me? Julian walked toward me. He stopped just inches away. I could feel the heat radiating off him. Because Mark Vance is a parasite, Julian said, his voice a low growl. He thinks he's playing at my level. He thinks he can use my company to fund his exit strategy with his mistress. I don't like being used, Elena. And I certainly don't like seeing a woman of your intelligence being treated like a disposable shadow. He reached out and tilted my chin up. I'm going to give you a choice, he said. You can take that thumb drive to the police right now. They'll arrest him. You'll be a witness. There will be a trial. Your name will be dragged through the mud. You'll be the scorned wife on every tabloid. And in the end, Mark's lawyers will probably find a way to pin the financial crimes on you anyway. Or? I whispered. Or, Julian said, his eyes darkening, you go back. You go back to that house. You put on that navy dress. You play the fragile wife for exactly 2 more weeks. You let him think his plan is working. You let him think you're blind, deaf, and dumb. And then, Julian said, we don't just stop him. We erase him. I'll give you the resources. I'll give you the leverage. But you have to be willing to be silent. Can you do that, Elena? Can you sit across the dinner table from a man who is trying to destroy you and smile? I thought about the last 7 years. I thought about the coffee I made him, the shirts I pressed, the way I had shrank myself until I was nearly invisible. The shame was gone. In its place was a cold, hard knot of resolve. I've been practicing silence for 7 years, Julian, I said. I'm an expert. I left the Sterling building and drove back to the suburbs. I felt like I was driving into a war zone, but I was the one with the hidden weapon now. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. But the air felt different. It felt heavy with the scent of the lilies I'd left on the counter. I went to the kitchen. The flowers were gone. Elena? I jumped. Mark was standing in the doorway to the living room. He was still in his work suit, but his tie was loosened. He looked concerned. Mark? You're home early, I said, my heart hammering. I kept my hands behind my back so he wouldn't see them shaking. I came back to check on you, he said, walking toward me. I saw those flowers on the counter, white lilies. They were intense. Who sent them? I forced a laugh. A soft, airy, fragile laugh. Oh, those? I bought them for myself, honey. I was feeling a bit down after missing the gala, and I thought the house needed some life. But they were so strong, they gave me a bit of a headache, so I threw them out. Mark searched my face. For a second, I thought he saw through it. I thought he saw Julian Sterling's thumb drive in my purse. You threw them out, he asked. Yes, I said, stepping closer to him, braving the smell of Sarah's perfume that still lingered on his skin. They felt too much like a funeral, didn't they? And we have so much to celebrate with the merger coming up. I reached out and smoothed his collar. You're right, Elle, he said, his posture relaxing. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. It felt like the touch of a snake. Nothing but life and success from here on out. He walked away toward his office, humming that same tune. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty spot on the counter where the flowers had been. The first betrayal wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the money. It was the fact that I was now a stranger in my own skin, playing a role for a man who didn't even know I had started the clock on his destruction. I thought it was a mistake, this path I was taking. I thought maybe I should just run. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first step toward the only thing that could save me. The next 4 days were a slow descent into a special kind of hell. It's one thing to be lied to. It's another to watch the lie being manufactured in real time while you sit across the table sipping tea and nodding like a mannequin. Mark became hyper-attentive. It was the love-bombing phase of a predator who thinks his prey is getting restless. He brought home expensive chocolates. He booked a spa day for me that I knew was just a way to get me out of the house for 6 hours so he could move more files. Every time I tried to act normal, he countered with a subtle jab at my reality. "Elle, did you forget to pay the electric bill?" he asked on Tuesday morning, tossing a red-stamped envelope onto the breakfast nook. I frowned, looking at it. "I paid that 2 weeks ago, Mark. I have the confirmation number in my email." He shook his head, looking at me with a pained, patronizing sort of pity. "I checked the account, honey. There's no record. Are you sure you didn't just think you paid it? You've been so forgetful lately. First the gala migraine, now this. I knew I'd paid it. I had the receipt printed and tucked in my private folder. But I looked at him and let my lower lip tremble just a fraction. I was so sure," I whispered. "Maybe I did forget. I'm sorry, Mark. Everything feels a bit foggy lately." He stepped closer, rubbing my shoulders. His hands felt like lead weights. "It's okay. This is why I took over the primary accounts, remember? You just focus on resting. I don't want you worrying your pretty head about the big things. That's what I'm here for." I looked down so he wouldn't see the fire in my eyes. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was trying to steal my sanity. He wanted a paper trail of my instability so that when he finally pulled the rug out, no one, not a judge, not a friend, not even my own family, would believe a word I said. If you're listening to this and you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you that the sky is green until you started to doubt the blue, you aren't alone. They do it because they're afraid of your clarity. They do it because your memory is the only thing they can't lock in a safe. Hold on to your truth, even when it's the only thing you have left. By Thursday, the escalation turned physical, not in violence, but in presence. Sarah started showing up at the house. "Mark forgot his briefing binder," she said, standing on my doorstep with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car likely bought with the incentives Mark had been draining from our joint savings. "Come in, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "He's in the study." I watched them from the kitchen. They weren't even hiding it anymore. Not really. They stood close enough for their sleeves to touch. They whispered in a shorthand that excluded me entirely. I brought them coffee. I made sure to use the special cups, the ones we got for our wedding. "Oh, Elena," Sarah said, taking a sip. "Mark tells me you're thinking of taking a long trip soon, to a wellness retreat in the mountains? That sounds so necessary for you." I looked at Mark. He didn't look up from his laptop. "A retreat?" I asked. "We haven't talked about that." Mark finally looked up, his expression one of mild surprise. "I mentioned it last night, Elle. You must have drifted off while I was talking. I think the crisp air would do wonders for those episodes you've been having." Episodes. He was labeling my existence as a series of medical failures. "I'll think about it," I said, smiling tightly. I walked out to the garden, my heart racing. I pulled out the burner phone Julian had given me, the one I had taken from Mark's bag. There was a new message from an unsaved number. "Check the vents in the study. 6 p.m. At 6 p.m., Mark told me he was taking Sarah back to the office to finish the Sterling projections. I waited until his car cleared the driveway. I went into the study. It smelled of his cigars and her perfume. I looked at the floor vent under his massive mahogany desk. I unscrewed the metal grate with a kitchen knife, my fingers slick with sweat. Tucked inside wasn't a file or money. It was a voice-activated recorder. I hit play. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were unmistakable. It was from an hour ago. "She's getting suspicious, Mark," Sarah's voice said. "The way she looked at the necklace, she's not as fragile as you think." "It doesn't matter what she thinks," Mark's voice replied, sounding cold and predatory. "The power of attorney is already filed. The medical evaluation from Dr. Aris is predated. By the time the Sterling merger closes next week, Elena will be in a private facility for observation. She'll be safe, she'll be cared for, and most importantly, she'll be unable to contest the asset liquidation. Julian Sterling wants a clean partner. I'm giving him one. A widower in spirit, if not in fact. And the house? Sold. Escrow closes the day she's admitted. We'll be in Zurich before she even figures out how to use the payphone in the ward. They laughed. A small, intimate sound. I sat on the floor of the study, the metal grate in my hand. They weren't just going to leave me, they were going to incarcerate me. They were going to use the fragility Mark had carefully cultivated as a cage. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I thought I would collapse. My husband, the man I had supported, the man I had loved, was planning to erase my very personhood for a merger and a girl in a red dress. I took the recorder. I put the vent back. I walked to the kitchen and dialed the only number I knew could help. Julian? I said when he picked up. I've been waiting for the call, Elena, he said. His voice was calm, like a lighthouse in a storm. They're going to commit me, I whispered. Next week, during the merger. I know, Julian said. I've seen the paperwork on Mark's desk. He's very efficient. What do I do? You do exactly what he expects, Julian said. You stay fragile. You stay confused. But tonight I want you to go to the safe in the basement. The one Mark thinks you don't have the code to. I don't have the code, I said. Yes, you do, Julian whispered. It's your wedding anniversary. Backward. Mark isn't as creative as he is cruel. I hung up. I went to the basement. The safe was hidden behind a stack of old moving boxes. I stared at the keypad. Our anniversary. October 12th, 10 to 12. I punched in 2101. Click. The door swung open. Inside weren't just the sterling files. There was a folder with my name on it. Inside were my medical records falsified. Letters from a doctor I'd never met, describing hallucinations I'd never had. But there was something else. At the very back of the safe was a blue velvet box. I opened it. It was a watch, a man's watch, Patek Philippe. On the back, an engraving, to Mark. For everything we've built. J.S. Julian Sterling. My head spun. Julian hadn't just been watching Mark. They were partners. They were close enough for 5-figure gifts. Then I saw the date of the engraving. It was from 5 years ago. I realized then that I was caught between two monsters. One who wanted to lock me away, and one who had been searching for me. Then I overheard something I was never meant to hear, not from the recorder, but from the hallway. Mark had come back. He was standing at the top of the basement stairs. Elena? He called out, his voice dropping the fragile act. It was sharp, dangerous. What are you doing in the dark? I shoved the watch into my pocket and closed the safe. Just looking for the Christmas decorations, honey. I called back, my heart stopping. I thought I'd start early. I walked up the stairs, passing him in the narrow space. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of the truth. Then I saw it, I whispered to myself as I reached the kitchen. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. A text from Julian. Don't trust the watch. Trust the leverage. End with. Then I overheard something I was never meant to hear. The air in the house had become curdled. Every time Mark entered a room, the temperature seemed to drop. I sat at the kitchen island the morning after the basement incident, my fingers wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. I was playing my part, shoulders slumped, eyes slightly unfocused, the fragile wife. Mark was across from me, reading the financial Sunday papers, looking every bit the successful executive. You're very quiet this morning, Elle, he said, not looking up. Did you sleep okay? I heard you tossing and turning. I had a dream, I whispered. I made sure my voice sounded brittle, like dry leaves. I dreamed we were back in our first apartment. Before the Sterling merger. Before all this money. We were happy then, weren't we? Mark finally looked up. For a fleeting second, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Was it guilt? No. It was irritation. We're happy now, Elena. We're about to be very, very wealthy. Don't let your nostalgia cloud the reality of what I've achieved for us. He went back to his paper. He didn't say what we've achieved. He said what I've achieved. 7 years of my life, my legal mind, my emotional labor, all relegated to a footnote in his grand narrative. He left for the office an hour later. On a Sunday. As soon as his car pulled out, I went back to the basement. I didn't go to the safe this time. I went to the laundry room. The burner phone in my pocket felt like a hot coal. Don't trust the watch. Trust the leverage. Julian's message played on a loop in my mind. I sat on the cold floor behind the dryer and pulled out the phone. I didn't text Julian. Instead, I started digging through the phone's history. I'm a lawyer by training, even if my license has been gathering dust. I know how to follow a trail of breadcrumbs. Mark had deleted the call logs, but he hadn't cleared the frequently contacted cache in the messaging app. There was a number, no name, just an address in the notes section of the contact. 1422, Sycamore Lane. Apartment 4B. I knew that address. It wasn't Sarah's. Sarah lived in a high-rise downtown that Mark paid for. 1422 Sycamore was in the older, grittier part of the city. I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't take my car, the one with the GPS Mark could track. I walked 3 blocks to the local grocery store and called an old-fashioned taxi. The building was a weathered brick walk-up. I climbed the stairs to 4B, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knocked. The door opened. A woman stood there. She looked to be in her late 50s. Her face was lined with a weariness that went bone deep. She looked at me, and her eyes widened. "You," she whispered. "You're her. You're Elena. How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. The apartment was small, clean, but smelled of medicinal alcohol and cheap tea. On the mantel was a photograph. It was Mark. He looked younger, maybe 21. He was standing next to this woman. They were both smiling. "I'm Mark's mother," she said. I felt the world tilt. "Mark's mother is dead," I said. He told me she died in a car accident when he was in college. He takes flowers to her grave every year on her birthday." The woman gave a hollow, bitter laugh. "He takes flowers to a piece of granite in a cemetery 3 towns over. He bought the plot to keep the lie alive. But I'm very much here, Elena. Though to him, I've been dead since the day I refused to sign over my husband's life insurance money to fund his first investment." I sat down on a frayed velvet chair. My husband hadn't just lied about an affair or a merger. He had murdered his own history. "He sends me money," she continued, her voice trembling. $500 a month. "It's hush money," he calls it. "He tells me that if I ever contact you, if I ever show my face in his world, he'll stop the payments. And I'm sick, Elena. I need the medicine." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of envelopes. "But I've been keeping these. He thinks he's so smart. He thinks he's erased his past. But he's been using my maiden name to funnel money out of his company for years. He thought I was too simple to understand. But I was a bookkeeper for 30 years before the tremors started." She handed me the envelopes. I opened them. My eyes scanned the documents. They weren't just bank statements. They were wire transfers. Mark wasn't just stealing from the Sterling merger. He was embezzling from his own partners, including Julian Sterling, and he was using a dead woman's identity to do it. This was the partial truth. This was the crack in his armor. But there was more. "There's someone else, isn't there?" I asked, looking at a transfer to an account in the Cayman Islands that didn't match the others. The woman looked away. "I don't know who that is. But I know Mark. He always has a backup plan for his backup plan. He told me once that the only way to truly win is to make sure everyone else is holding the smoking gun." I realized then why Julian Sterling had been searching for me. Julian didn't want to save me. He was a shark. He knew Mark was stealing from him, but he couldn't prove it because Mark had buried the paper trail under my signature and a dead woman's name. Julian needed me to be the one to open the vault. He needed the fragile wife to become the ultimate whistleblower. I felt a strange shift inside me. The pain was still there, the betrayal of my marriage, the lie of the dead mother, but it was being overwritten by a cold, numb awareness. I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't even a victim. I was the only person who held the map to the minefield. I stood up and hugged the woman. She felt like glass, like she might break if I squeezed too hard. "I'll make sure you get your medicine," I whispered. "And you'll never have to take another cent of his hush money again." I walked out of the apartment with the envelopes tucked under my arm. I called Julian from the taxi. "I found his mother, Julian," I said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I see," Julian said. His voice was unreadable. "Then you know part of it." "Part of it?" I asked. "What else is there?" "Mark isn't just embezzling, Elena," Julian said. He's selling the Sterling Group's proprietary algorithms to our biggest competitor, and he's doing it using your private consulting IP. If that sale goes through on the night of the merger, you won't just go to a mental facility, you'll go to federal prison for corporate espionage. The numbness deepened. It was a cold armor, protecting me from the sheer scale of the malice. What do I do now? I asked. Go home, Julian said. Mark is waiting for you. He knows you left the house. Be ready. This is where he tries to break you for good. I hung up as the taxi pulled onto my street. Mark's car was in the driveway. He was standing on the front porch, arms crossed, his face a mask of cold fury. I tucked the envelopes under the floorboard of the taxi and stepped out. Where have you been, Elena? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. I've been calling you for 2 hours. I looked at him and for the first time I didn't feel afraid. I went for a walk, Mark, I said, my voice hovering in that fragile space. I got lost. I couldn't remember which street was ours. He searched my face, his eyes narrow. He stepped off the porch and grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to bruise but hard enough to show he could. We're going to see Dr. Eris tomorrow, he said. This has gone on long enough. You're not safe on your own. Okay, Mark, I whispered. Whatever you think is best. As he led me into the house, I realized what I didn't know, was how deep it really went. He thought he was leading me to my cage. I knew I was leading him to his end. What I didn't know was how deep it really went. The next morning, the monster was gone. I woke up not to a cold bed or a sharp command, but to the smell of fresh jasmine tea and toasted sourdough. Mark was sitting at the edge of the bed, the sunlight catching the soft blue of his sweater. He looked like the man I had married 7 years ago, the boy from the library with the crooked smile and the gentle hands. Hey, sleepyhead, he whispered, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. I shrank back instinctively, the memory of his grip on my wrist from the night before still throbbing in my mind. He noticed, and his face crumbled into an expression of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. I'm so sorry about yesterday, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I saw you come home in that taxi, looking so lost, and I panicked. I've been so stressed with this merger, so focused on providing for us, that I forgot the most important thing. I forgot to be your husband. He reached out and took my hand. This time his touch was light. Tentative. I cancelled the appointment with Dr. Eris, he said. My heart skipped a beat. You did? Yes. I realized I was pushing you into a box because I didn't know how to handle my own fear. You aren't fragile, Elena. You're just exhausted. We both are. I've been a terrible partner lately. I've let work and Sarah, and the pressure of Sterling get in the way of us. He looked me straight in the eyes. I'm letting Sarah go. After the merger closes on Friday, she's being transferred to the London branch. I want it to be just us again. I want to take that trip to Tuscany we always talked about. No work, no phones. Just you and me. For a split second, I felt a dangerous warmth bloom in my chest. This was the false hope. This was the drug that keeps victims in the cycle for years. He was saying everything I had prayed to hear for 3 years. He was admitting fault. He was offering a solution. He was offering us. Do you mean that, Mark? I asked, my voice trembling not as an act but with the sheer exhaustion of the war. With my whole life, he said. He pulled me into a hug. He smelled like my favorite soap and the home we used to have. For the next 3 days, the house was a sanctuary. Mark didn't go into the office. He stayed home. We cooked together. We watched old movies. He didn't check his burner phone, at least not when I was looking. He was attentive, funny, and kind. He asked about my law degree. He talked about me reopening my practice once we were settled in Italy. It was so convincing that I started to doubt Julian Sterling. I started to doubt the dead mother. Maybe I'd misunderstood the bank statements. Maybe the medical records were just a precaution he'd considered in a moment of weakness. The human mind is a terrifying thing. It would rather believe a beautiful lie than a soul-crushing truth. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to wake up from the nightmare and find my husband waiting for me. On Wednesday night, we sat on the back porch with a bottle of wine. I'm so glad we're here. Mark whispered, his arm around my shoulders. I feel like I can finally breathe again. I've been carrying so much. I just want you to know. No matter what happens on Friday at the signing, you are the only thing that matters to me. He kissed my temple. It felt so real. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt the calm before the storm, that moment where the person who broke you suddenly starts trying to fix you, be careful. Sometimes they aren't fixing the relationship. They're just greasing the hinges of the trap so you don't hear it closing. That night, Mark fell asleep early, his breathing deep and rhythmic. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The false hope was a heavy fog, but Julian's voice kept piercing through it. That calm is the most dangerous part. I got out of bed, moving like a shadow. I needed to know. I needed one piece of proof that the man sleeping in my bed was the man he claimed to be. I went to his laundry hamper. I found the blue sweater he'd been wearing all day. I reached into the pockets. Empty. I went to his laptop. He'd left it on the kitchen island. Locked. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he had wiped the slate clean. But then, I saw his gym bag by the door. The one he'd taken to the club for an hour that afternoon while I was napping. I opened the side pocket. Inside was a small, white pharmacy bag. I pulled out the receipt. Patient, Elena Vance. Medication, flunitrazepam. My blood turned to ice. I'm a lawyer. I know what that is. It's a powerful sedative. It's often used as a date rape drug. It causes profound drowsiness and, more importantly, short-term amnesia. Mark wasn't taking me to Tuscany. He was drugging me. He was putting it in my jasmine tea every morning. That's why I felt so peaceful. That's why the fog felt so thick. He was chemically inducing the fragility he needed for the medical evaluation. He wasn't canceling the appointment with Dr. Eris. He was preparing the evidence for it. He wasn't letting Sarah go. He was silencing me so he could take her with him. I looked at the stairs. My husband was up there, dreaming of the day he would finally be rid of me. I walked to the kitchen sink and looked at the teapot. There were still a few drops of tea at the bottom. I took a cotton swab, soaked it in the liquid, and tucked it into a plastic baggie. Evidence. I realized then that the peace, the laughter, the I love yous, it was all a tactical diversion. He wanted me compliant for the signing on Friday. He wanted me to walk into that boardroom with Julian Sterling, smiling and drowsy, and sign away the rest of my life. The calm was over. I went back to bed. I lay down next to him. I even let him pull me closer in his sleep. I didn't scream. I didn't wake him up. I just watched the clock. That calm was the most dangerous part because it almost worked. It almost made me forget that I was married to a man who would rather see me lobotomized by chemicals than see me free. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I was counting the hours until Friday. I was counting the hours until the false hope turned into a devastating reality. That calm was the most dangerous part. Friday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I woke up before the alarm, my body vibrating with a low-level electric dread. Beside me, Mark was already awake. He was humming as he polished his shoes. It was the same tune, the one from the gala. I realized now it was the melody of a man who thought he'd already won. "Big day, Elle," he said. His voice bright. "The Sterling signing is at noon. After that, we go straight to the airport. I've already packed your bags. Surprise, right?" He pointed to two sleek silver suitcases by the door. I hadn't even heard him packing them. I don't remember seeing my passport," I said, my voice intentionally thick, playing the part of the drugged, compliant wife. "I have it, honey. Keep it safe with the tickets. Drink your tea. You look a little peaked." I watched him pour the tea. My hands were under the duvet, clenched into white-knuckled fists. I waited for him to go into the bathroom to shower, then I lunged for the cup. I didn't pour it out, he'd noticed the lack of residue. I poured it into a small thermos I had hidden under the bed, replacing it with plain water from my nightstand carafe. I sat there, sipping the water, staring at the silver suitcases. He hadn't just packed my clothes. He had packed my life into 2 boxes, and I knew with a soul-deep certainty that those bags weren't going to Italy. The Sterling boardroom was a cathedral of glass, 30 stories above the city. Julian Sterling was seated at the head of the table, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers. Mark sat to his right, looking like the golden boy of the industry. I was seated at the far end, the silent partner. "The terms are finalized," Julian said, his voice flat and professional. He didn't look at me once. Not a single glance. It felt like a secondary betrayal. Was he in on this? Was the searching for you just a way to keep me from going to the police until the papers were signed? We just need the final signatures on the intellectual property transfer, one of the lawyers said, sliding a thick stack of documents toward me. Elena, if you'll just sign the highlighted sections. Mark leaned over, his hand resting on my shoulder. His thumb rubbed the base of my neck. Go ahead, Elle. For our future. I looked down at the papers. My eyes blurred, but not from the drugs. The documents weren't just about the merger. Tucked into the middle of the IP transfer was a document titled, Affidavit of Voluntary Commitment and Transfer of Guardianship. My heart stopped. The Italy trip was a lie. The flight was actually a transport to a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland. By signing these papers, I wasn't just giving Mark the company. I was giving him legal ownership of my physical body. I was declaring myself mentally incompetent and appointing him as my sole guardian. I looked at Mark. He was smiling, a warm, encouraging, murderous smile. Is there a problem, Elena? Julian asked. His voice was cold. I looked at Julian. For a split second, I saw it. A tiny flick of his eyes toward the door. Suddenly, the boardroom door opened. Sarah walked in. She wasn't wearing her senior analyst suit. She was wearing a traveling coat. She had a boarding pass sticking out of her pocket. Sorry I'm late, she said, her voice dripping with triumph. She walked right over to Mark and stood behind him. She didn't even pretend to be professional. She leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Mark laughed and squeezed her hand right there, in front of everyone. In front of the lawyers. In front of me. Elena doesn't mind, Mark said aloud, looking at me with total contempt. Do you, honey? You're tired. You want to go to sleep. Just sign the papers and the doctors will take care of everything. The room felt like it was shrinking. The lawyers weren't saying anything, they were Mark's lawyers, Julian's lawyers. Everyone in this room was paid to watch me disappear. I'm not signing, I said. My voice wasn't fragile. It was a whip crack in the silence of the room. Mark's smile didn't fade. It morphed into something ugly. Elena, don't make a scene. The medication is clearly making you confused. We talked about this. The medication you've been putting in my tea. I asked, standing up. My chair scraped against the floor like a scream. The flunitrazepam I found the receipt for in your gym bag. The room went silent. Mark stood up, his face reddening. She's hallucinating. You see. This is exactly why the commitment is necessary. Julian, I apologize. My wife is. Your wife, Julian interrupted, standing up slowly, is the only person in this room who actually owns the Sterling IP. Julian looked at Mark. Then he looked at me. Mark, Julian said, his voice like ice. Did you really think I didn't know you were embezzling through your dead mother's accounts? Did you think I didn't see the transfers to the Caymans? Mark's face went pale. He looked at Sarah. She took a step back, her eyes darting toward the exit. Julian, wait, Mark stammered. I can explain that. It was a tax strategy. It was a crime, Julian said. But more importantly, you tried to use my merger to cover the tracks of your fraud by pinning it on a woman who is 10 times the legal mind you will ever be. Julian turned to me. Elena, I have the police downstairs. I have the evidence of the drugging. I have the statements from your mother-in-law. I looked at Mark. He looked like a cornered rat. He lunged across the table, grabbing for the papers, wanting to shred the evidence of the commitment. But I was faster. I grabbed the heavy glass water carafe and slammed it down on his hand. Mark screamed, clutching his fingers. That night, I whispered, my voice cold and dead, I stopped crying. I didn't look at his blood. I didn't look at his pain. I looked at the silver suitcases by the door. Mark looked up at me, his face twisted in agony. You bitch. You think Sterling is going to save you? He's a shark. He'll take everything. He's not taking anything, Mark, I said. Because I've already transferred the IP to a private holding company. One you can't touch. One that doesn't exist on your maps. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking. You can have him, Sarah, I said. You can have the lies, the debts, and the Italy trip. But the house, the money, and the future, those belong to me. I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't wait for the police. I didn't wait for Julian. I walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Mark being forced into a chair by security. He was shouting my name. He sounded small. He sounded like a ghost. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. I looked at it for one last second. 7 years of my life condensed into a small gold circle. I dropped it into the trash can in the elevator. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to the pier and watched the tide come in. I stopped crying. Because you don't cry for things that were never real. That night, I stopped crying. The world is different when you have no tears left. Colors are sharper. Sounds are more distinct. The emotional static that usually clouds your vision, the hope, the fear, the desperate need to be loved, it all just evaporates. What's left is a cold, crystalline clarity. I spent the first night after the boardroom collapse in a small, unremarkable motel near the docks. I didn't want the luxury of the Hyatt or the ghosts of our suburban house. I wanted a room that felt like a blank slate. I sat on the edge of the bed for 6 hours, watching the digital clock blink. Mark was in custody. Julian's legal team had ensured the drugging evidence was handed over to the police immediately. The falsified medical records, the receipt from his gym bag, the cotton swab from my tea, it was an airtight case for domestic abuse and chemical assault. But I knew Mark. A cornered rat doesn't just die. It looks for a hole. He would be calling his fixers. He would be trying to spin the embezzlement as my idea. He would be using every ounce of the fragile wife narrative he'd built to convince the world I had framed him in a fit of mental instability. They thought I was healing, I whispered to the empty room. I was calculating. I didn't go back to the house the next day. I went to a storage unit I had rented under my maiden name 3 days prior. Inside were the boxes of files I had been slowly sneaking out of Mark's office for weeks, the ones he thought I was too dazed to notice. I laid them out on the floor. I stopped being the wife. I started being the lawyer I was born to be. I mapped out his network. Mark wasn't just a thief, he was a bridge. He was the middleman between Sterling Group and a series of shell companies that didn't just hide money, they hid influence. I saw the patterns. Every time he gaslit me about a bill or a bank statement, it coincided with a massive transfer to an entity called Vesper Holdings. Vesper. The Evening Star. I searched the registration for Vesper Holdings. It wasn't in Mark's name. It wasn't in Sarah's. It was in mine. He had been using my identity to build a shadow empire. If the authorities looked at Vesper, they wouldn't find a greedy husband. They would find a rogue wife who had been systematically draining her husband's company and her partner's merger. This was the smoking gun Julian had mentioned. Mark hadn't just planned to lock me away. He had planned to make me the villain of his story. He was going to live a life of luxury in Switzerland on Vesper's funds, while I sat in a ward, legally responsible for the crimes that paid for his champagne. I felt a cold smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Mark had made one fatal mistake. He had built the entire structure using my legal credentials, assuming I would never be sane enough to look at the foundations. On Monday, I went to the police station, not to drop the charges, but to request a private meeting with the lead detective. I didn't wear the navy dress. I wore a sharp, charcoal gray power suit I had kept in the back of the closet for 5 years. I pulled my hair back into a tight, professional knot. When I walked into the interview room, the detective looked surprised. He was expecting the trembling woman from the boardroom. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "your husband's lawyers are already filing for bail. They're claiming the drugging was a medical misunderstanding, and that you have a history of hallucinations." "I'm sure they are," I said, sitting down and opening my briefcase. "But I'm not here to talk about the drugs. I'm here to talk about Vesper Holdings." The detective frowned. "Vesper? We haven't seen that name in the filings." "You won't," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "Because it's buried in the subledgers of the Sterling merger. But here is the proof of the identity theft. Here is the proof that my signature was forged on the Vesper registration. And here," I tapped a specific page, "is the proof that the money in Vesper didn't just come from Sterling. It came from a series of illegal short sells Mark executed using insider information." I watched his eyes widen as he realized the scale of the fraud. "They thought I was broken," I said, my voice low and steady. "They thought they could use my name as a shield. But a shield can also be a weapon." For the next week, I became a ghost in the machine. I worked 18 hours a day. I contacted the banks. I spoke to the auditors Mark thought he had bought. I didn't call Julian Sterling. Not once. I knew Julian was watching. I knew he was waiting for me to come crawling back for protection, to thank him for saving me in that boardroom. But I didn't need a savior. I needed a clean slate. I went to our suburban house one last time. It felt like a museum of a life I had outgrown. I walked into the basement, to the safe. I opened it. The Patek Philippe watch was still there. I picked it up and turned it over. To Mark. For everything we've built, J.S. I realized now what the watch really was. It wasn't a gift of friendship. It was a golden handcuff. Julian had known Mark was dirty from day one. He had encouraged it. He had let Mark build Vesper because Julian wanted the sterling IP to be stolen so he could claim a massive insurance payout and then buy it back for pennies under a different name. They were both using me. Mark as a scapegoat, Julian as a catalyst. I sat on the basement floor and laughed. It was a quiet, jagged sound. They thought they were the players and I was the piece. They thought I was healing, but I was calculating the exact moment to tip the board. I took the watch. I took the Vesper files. I took the forged commitment papers. I realized that I didn't just have evidence of a crime. I had the power to destroy the merger entirely. If I went public with the fact that Sterling Group was knowingly partnering with a fraudster to execute an insurance scam, the Sterling name would be worthless by morning. I looked at the phone. One contact. Julian Sterling. I didn't call him. I waited. I let the silence stretch. I let Mark rot in his cell, waiting for his lawyers to find a loophole that no longer existed. I let Julian sit in his glass tower, waiting for the asset to report for duty. And then I realized, I already had the leverage. I didn't need to fight them. I just needed to let them finish each other off. I walked out of the house and locked the door for the last time. The normal life was gone. The fragile wife was dead. And for the first time in 7 years, I was the one holding the keys. And then I realized, I already had the leverage. Power isn't a loud thing. It doesn't scream, and it doesn't need to brandish a weapon. Real power is the silence in a room when everyone else is waiting for you to speak. I sat in a small, glass-walled cafe across from the Sterling building. I was watching the digital ticker on the side of the skyscraper. The stock was holding steady, but there was a jitter in the numbers and nervousness that only those on the inside could feel. The merger was supposed to be finalized in 48 hours. I had a manila envelope on the table. Inside wasn't just the evidence of Mark's crimes, it was something much more surgical. During my week of silent transformation, I hadn't just been looking at what Mark stole. I had been looking at how Julian Sterling allowed it to happen. I'm a lawyer. I know how to read the fine print of a corporate bylaws agreement. I had found the golden clause. It was a tiny provision in the Sterling Group's charter, something buried under 40 years of amendments. It stated that in the event of a merger, if the intellectual property being brought to the table was found to be under legal dispute or tied to criminal activity, the entire board of the acquiring company, Julian's board, became personally liable for the losses. Julian hadn't just been using me to catch Mark. He had been playing a dangerous game of chicken with his own board of directors. He wanted Mark to commit the fraud so he could oust his board members and take total control of the company. I was the only person who could prove that Julian knew about the fraud before the signing. I wasn't just Mark's victim. I was the witness that could send Julian Sterling to prison for securities fraud and collusion. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an unknown number. I knew who it was. Elena, the voice said. It was Julian. He sounded tired, but there was still that edge of predatory command in his tone. You haven't been answering my calls. The police are asking for your final statement to keep Mark behind bars. Without it, he walks on bail tomorrow morning. Let him walk, I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. There was a long silence on the other end. Excuse me? Let him walk, Julian. I'm sure he'll head straight for the airport. I'm sure he'll try to access the Vesper accounts. And that's exactly what you want, isn't it? You want him to flee so you can claim the rogue employee defense and trigger your insurance payout. You've been busy, I see, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. What do you want, Elena? Money? I can make you very comfortable. I don't want your money, Julian. I want the Sterling IP. All of it. The algorithms Mark tried to sell, the patents I helped him develop, and the consulting firm he built using my credentials. Julian laughed a dry, humorless sound. That's half my company's valuation. You're asking for a king's ransom. No, I said, looking up at the glass tower. I'm asking for my life back. With interest. Because if I don't get it, I'm not going to the police about Mark. I'm going to the SEC about you. I have the Patek Philippe watch, Julian. I have the logs of the private meetings you had with Mark at the Hyatt 3 months before the betrayal. I know you coached him on how to hide the money. I heard Julian's breath hitch. He thought he had been the puppet master. He thought I was just the asset he had rescued from the hallway. He hadn't realized that the hallway was where I started learning how to navigate the dark. You're a very dangerous woman, Elena, he whispered. I'm a lawyer who was forced to be a housewife for 7 years, I replied. I've had a lot of time to study the enemy. I hung up. This was the leverage. It wasn't a gun to his head, it was a mirror to his soul. I knew that Julian Sterling cared about one thing above all else, his legacy. He would rather lose half his wealth than spend a single day in a suit that wasn't bespoke. But I wasn't done with Mark yet. I went to the jailhouse later that afternoon. I requested a visitor's pass. When Mark was led into the room, he looked pathetic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was greasy, and the charm that had kept me captive for nearly a decade had completely evaporated. He looked at me with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. "Elle. Thank God," he hissed, leaning against the glass. "You have to tell them. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Tell them about your episodes. If you sign the affidavit saying you were confused, the charges won't stick. We can still go to Italy, baby. I have the money hidden. We can start over." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tried to drug me into a coma. "I found your mother, Mark," I said. He froze. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. "She's quite lovely," I continued. "She told me all about your tax strategies. She also gave me the original birth certificate you tried to burn. The one that proves you've been operating under a stolen social security number since you were 21. You aren't even Mark Vance, are you?" Mark's mouth opened and closed but no sound came out. "The man I married doesn't exist," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You're a ghost who built a life on a foundation of lies. And now, the ghost is going to vanish." "Elena, please," he whispered, his eyes welling with fake tears. "I did it for us. I wanted to be someone for you." "No," I said, standing up. "You did it for you. You used me as a bookmark in a story you were writing for yourself. Well, I'm closing the book." I leaned closer to the glass. "Julian Sterling is going to let you walk tomorrow," I whispered. "He's going to make sure the guards miss your exit. He's going to leave a car for you. He's going to make you think you're escaping." Mark's eyes sparked with a flicker of hope. "He is?" "Yes," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "But he's not doing it to save you. He's doing it because the moment you cross that state line, you aren't a domestic case anymore. You're a federal fugitive. And I've already given the FBI the coordinates to the Vesper server in Zurich." Mark's face crumpled. He realized then that there was no Italy. There was no escape. He was being moved from one cage to a much larger, much colder one. "I have the leverage, Mark," I said. "I have the money. I have the IP. And I have the truth." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back when he started screaming my name. I didn't look back when he began pounding on the glass. I walked out into the crisp afternoon air. I didn't have a husband. I didn't have a normal life. I had something much better. I had a plan that was already in motion, and all the players were exactly where I needed them to be. All I had to do was wait. All I had to do was wait. There is a specific kind of silence that precedes a landslide. It's a heavy, expectant quiet, where the earth is still holding its breath just before everything gives way. Tuesday morning was that silence. I sat in my new office, a temporary corner suite in a boutique hotel that Mark didn't know existed, and watched the news. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. Black. No sugar. No cream. It tasted like reality. The first consequence didn't hit Mark. And it didn't hit Julian. It hit Sarah. Revenge, when it's strategic, doesn't strike the heart first. It strikes the ego. Sarah's ego was her career, her senior analyst title, and her proximity to power. She thought she was the architect of my replacement. She thought she was the one who had successfully navigated the shark-infested waters of the Sterling Group. At 9 a.m. the internal memo went out at Sterling. I had ensured a copy reached me through a disgruntled junior associate I had consulted with earlier that week. Effective immediately, Sarah Miller has been terminated for cause. Following an internal audit, discrepancies in the Sterling Vance IP transfer have been traced to her login credentials. Legal action is pending. I didn't have to do much. I simply pointed the auditors to the backdoor Mark had built into the server, the one he'd shared with Sarah, so she could monitor the Vesper transfers while he was busy handling me at home. I didn't frame her. I just stopped hiding her. I walked to the window. Across the street, I could see the side entrance of the Sterling building. A few minutes later, Sarah emerged. She wasn't the triumphant woman from the boardroom. She was carrying a cardboard box. Her expensive coat was open, fluttering in the wind. And she looked small, fragile, even. She stood on the curb, looking for a taxi that wouldn't come, because I had already alerted the corporate car service that her account was frozen. I watched her pull out her phone, her fingers trembling. I knew who she was calling. She was calling Mark. But Mark's phone was currently in an evidence locker at the 14th precinct. I felt a brief flash of something. Was it pity? No. It was recognition. She had been a tool, just like I had been. The difference was, I knew I was a tool and started sharpening my edges. She thought she was the hand holding the handle. I turned my attention back to my laptop. The second consequence was starting to ripple. Julian Sterling's board of directors had received an anonymous tip, an encrypted file containing the Patek Philippe watch's serial number and the dates of Julian's off-book meetings with Mark. Julian had wanted to use Mark's fraud to oust his board. He hadn't expected the board to find out he was the one who had invited the fox into the henhouse. My phone rang. It was the detective from the 14th precinct. Mrs. Vance. We've had a development. Your husband. He's been released on bail. A private donor posted the bond an hour ago. I know, I said. Thank you for the heads up, detective. He's headed to your residence on Sycamore. The detective added, his voice laced with concern. We have a unit nearby, but technically he hasn't violated any restraining orders yet because you haven't filed for one. I don't need a restraining order, detective. I'm not at the house. And I don't think he'll be staying long. I hung up and checked the security feed on my laptop. I had installed hidden cameras in the suburban house months ago, one of the paranoia habits I developed when Mark started gaslighting me. I watched as Mark's car screeched into the driveway. He ran to the front door, fumbling with his keys. He looked frantic. He looked like a man who was already halfway to Switzerland in his mind. He burst into the house. He didn't look for me. He didn't look for his clothes. He ran straight to the basement. He lunged for the safe behind the moving boxes. I watched him punch in the code, 2101. The door swung open. I could see the back of his head as he stared into the empty vault. The Vesper files were gone. The cash he'd been skimming was gone. The Patek Philippe watch was gone. In their place, I had left a single item. The white pharmacy bag for the flunitrazepam. And inside it, a copy of the video from the Hyatt Hotel, the one of him and Sarah laughing about my migraines. Mark let out a sound that wasn't human, a raw, guttural howl of realization. He turned and kicked the moving boxes, his face contorted in a mask of pure, impotent rage. He grabbed his phone and started dialing. I could see his lips moving. Sarah. Pick up. We have to go. She took it. The bitch took everything. But Sarah wasn't picking up. Sarah was currently being interviewed by the SEC at the bottom of the Sterling building. Mark ran back upstairs, his eyes darting around the living room like a trapped animal. He grabbed a heavy crystal vase, a wedding gift, and smashed it against the wall. Elena! He screamed at the empty house. I know you're watching. I'll kill you. I'll find you and I'll destroy you. I sipped my coffee. I wasn't afraid. You can't be afraid of a fire that has already burnt itself out. Mark was just the smoke now. He ran to the kitchen, looking for the backup keys to the secondary accounts he'd hidden in the spice rack. He pulled out the jar of saffron. Empty. He pulled out the jar of rosemary. Empty. Every safety net he had woven for himself had been meticulously unraveled while he was busy love-bombing me with jasmine tea. Then, the first real blow landed. There was a knock at the door. Not the police. Not the FBI. It was a process server. Mark opened the door, his chest heaving. The man handed him a thick stack of papers. Mark Vance? You've been served. Summons for a civil suit regarding corporate theft, and a petition for divorce with a request for a total asset freeze. Mark stared at the papers. He looked at the man, then back at the papers. This is a mistake, Mark stammered. My wife. She's not in her right mind. She can't file this. The filing was made by the law firm of Sterling and Associates, the man said, disinterested. Have a nice day. Mark froze. Sterling and Associates. He thought Julian had betrayed me to save him. He thought he and Julian were on the same side. He sat down on the floor of the foyer, surrounded by the wreckage of the crystal vase. He looked at the papers. He looked at the empty house. He blamed the wrong person. He thought Julian had turned on him to keep the money. He thought Julian had been the one to empty the safe and serve the papers. He didn't even consider that the fragile woman he'd been drugging was the one who had orchestrated the entire collapse. He picked up his phone and sent a final, desperate text to Julian. You can't do this. I have the logs. If I go down, you go down with me. Call off the lawyers. I watched the text pop up on the mirrored screen I had set up to intercept his outgoing data. Julian didn't reply. Mark sat there in the silence, a man who had lost his name, his money, and his mistress in the span of 6 hours. I closed my laptop. The first consequence is never the end. It's just the taste of what's coming. Mark was sitting in a house that didn't belong to him, waiting for a partner who had already replaced him. He thought he was the hunter. He thought I was the trophy. He didn't realize that a trophy is just a dead thing you keep on a shelf. And I was very, very much alive. They blamed the wrong person. There is a frantic energy to a man who realizes the ground beneath him is no longer solid. It's the vibration of a trapped fly, noisy, desperate, and ultimately, futile. Mark spent the next 3 hours in that empty house, pacing the floors like a ghost haunting his own life. On the security feed, I watched him go through every drawer, every coat pocket, every hollowed-out book. He was looking for a ghost of a chance. A single account he had forgotten to list. A stray $1,000 he'd tucked away for a rainy day. But I had turned his rainy day into a monsoon. By 2 p.m., his phone, which he had managed to get back from the police upon his arranged release, started ringing. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't Julian. It was his creditors. You see, Mark's lifestyle wasn't just funded by theft. It was built on a house of cards made of high-interest debt, leveraged against the expected payout of the Sterling merger. When I froze the Vesper accounts, I didn't just take his stolen money, I triggered a default on every loan he had taken out in my name. I watched him answer the phone. His voice was a jagged mess of bravado and pleading. I told you, the funds are tied up in the merger transition. It's a temporary liquidity issue. No, don't call my board, listen to me. They hung up. Mark threw the phone against the kitchen island. It didn't break, but the sound was a sharp, final crack in the silence of the room. He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. Then, the second crack appeared. Sarah appeared at the front door. She didn't knock. She had a key, the one Mark had given her for their afternoon meetings. She burst in, her face red and blotchy from crying. She wasn't carrying her box anymore. She was carrying a legal folder. Mark! What is this? She screamed, throwing the folder at him. The SEC. They showed me the wire transfers. They showed me the accounts in the Caymans. Why is my name on the secondary registration? You said it was just a shell for tax purposes. You said it was safe. Mark stood up, his eyes wild. It was safe, Sarah. Someone leaked the subledgers. It had to be Sterling. He's cleaning house. Sterling? Sarah laughed, a high manic sound. Sterling isn't cleaning house, Mark. He's burning it down. I just got a call from the Bar Association. They're investigating my license because of the forged signatures you had me notarize. You promised me Switzerland. You promised me a partnership. I promised you a life. Mark roared back. But right now, I have nothing. Elena took it. She took everything from the safe. Sarah froze. She looked around the living room, the room I had decorated, the room she had sat in while sipping my wedding wine. Elena? She whispered. The fragile wife? The one who can't even pay a utility bill without help? Mark, she's probably hiding in a motel room somewhere shaking. She didn't do this. She did. Mark stepped into her space, his face inches from hers. I saw her at the jail. She wasn't fragile. She was someone else. She found my mother, Sarah. She knows I'm not Vance. Sarah backed away, her expression shifting from anger to pure, unadulterated terror. You told me your mother was dead. You told me you were an orphan from Connecticut. I lied. Mark screamed. Everyone lies. Now help me think. We need to get to the airport. I have a bag in the garage with a fake passport. We can still make the 6 p.m. flight. I watched through the camera as Mark ran to the garage. Sarah followed him, looking like she wanted to vomit. Mark lunged for the rafters where he kept his emergency kit. He pulled down a dusty gym bag, he zipped it open. Inside was a pile of shredded paper, thousands of tiny confetti pieces that used to be his fake passport and $5,000 in cash. I had spent my wellness retreat hours in the garage, meticulously feeding his escape plan through a crosscut shredder. Mark fell to his knees in the oil-stained concrete. He looked like a broken toy. Sarah didn't comfort him. She didn't even touch him. She just turned around and walked out of the garage. "Sarah, where are you going?" he yelled. "To the police," she said, her voice flat. "I'm turning state's evidence, Mark. I'm not going to prison for a man who doesn't even have a real name." The garage door slammed shut. Mark was alone. Truly, utterly alone. He stayed there for a long time. The sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the wreckage of his ambition. And then he did the only thing a parasite can do when it runs out of blood. He came to me. My burner phone buzzed at 8 p.m. I was sitting in my hotel suite, a glass of water on the table, the city lights twinkling below me like diamonds on a dark velvet cloth. "Elena," he whispered when I picked up. He sounded like he had been screaming for hours. His voice was a ghost of its former self. "Mark," I said. My voice was neutral, calm. "I'm at the house, Elle. It's so dark. The power. They cut the power." "I know," I said. "I stopped the automatic payments." "I'm sorry," he sobbed. A real sob this time, the kind that comes from the realization that the game is over. I was wrong. I was so stressed, and the money. It changed me. "But I love you, Elle. I still love you. Please. Just tell me where you are. We can fix this. I'll give it all back. I'll confess to the embezzlement if you just help me with the FBI. You're a lawyer. You know how to make this go away." He was begging. The man who had tucked me into a service hallway like a piece of unwanted luggage was now kneeling in a dark garage, begging his fragile wife for legal protection. "You want me to help you, Mark?" I asked. "Yes, please. I have nowhere else to go. Sterling is going to have me killed or arrested. Sarah has turned on me. You're the only one left who knows who I really am." "That's the problem, Mark," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I do know who you really are. And that's why I'm not coming to help you. Elena, please. They're coming for me. I can hear the sirens." "Those aren't sirens for you, Mark," I said. "Not yet. Those are the sirens for the Sterling Group. The news just broke. The SEC has halted the merger." "What?" he whispered. "I sent the files, Mark. All of them. Not just your files, Julian's files, too. The watch. The Hyatt logs. The whole insurance scam. The Sterling Group is currently being raided. But that means the money is gone. The IP. It's worthless if the company collapses." "For you it is," I said, "but I didn't send the IP to the SEC. I sent it to a private trust. One that you signed over to me when you thought you were signing an insurance update." I could hear his breathing heavy, panicked gasps. "You planned this," he whispered. "The whole time. The tea. You didn't drink the tea." "No, Mark. I didn't drink the tea. But I did enjoy the jasmine. It's very calming." I hung up. I looked at the screen. The news was a frenzy of ticker tapes and breaking news banners. The Sterling Empire was cracking in real time. They came to me for help. Mark for my loyalty, Julian for my silence. They both thought I was a resource to be tapped. They didn't realize I was the leak that was draining the tank. I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the chemical peace of the flunitrazepam. It was the peace of a job well done. The antagonists were no longer the ones in control. They were the ones unraveling. And as I watched the city lights, I realized that the best part of the revenge wasn't the money or the justice. It was the silence after the phone stopped ringing. They came to me for help. The pieces were on the board. The clock was ticking. But the most dangerous part of any strategy isn't the attack, it's the moment just before, when you have to ensure every exit is barred. I spent Wednesday morning in a quiet, sterile conference room I had rented under a shell corporation. No windows, just white walls, and the hum of a high-speed server. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was preparing the final conditions. I had 3 laptops open. One tracked the Sterling Group's plummeting stock. The second was a direct line to the FBI's white-collar crime division. The third was my own private ledger, the one that now held the digital keys to the Sterling IP. My phone rang. It wasn't the burner. It was my official line. The one Mark had tried to have disconnected months ago. Elena Vance. Speaking. This is Marcus Thorne, Chief Counsel for the Sterling Group Board of Directors. We find ourselves in a delicate position, Mrs. Vance. Mr. Sterling has been unavailable for comment since the SEC raid this morning, and the board has recently come into possession of certain communications. Sent. I assume you mean the documents proving Julian Sterling's prior knowledge of the Vance fraud, I said, my voice steady. Among other things, Thorne cleared his throat. It was the sound of a man who knew he was standing on a sinking ship. The board is prepared to offer you a settlement. A significant one, in exchange for your full cooperation and, more importantly, the return of the proprietary algorithms currently held in your private trust. This was it. The final play. They thought they were negotiating for the company's survival. They didn't realize they were negotiating for their own handcuffs. I have 3 conditions, I said. And they are non-negotiable. We're listening, Thorne said. First, the Sterling Group will issue a public apology and a full retraction of the statements regarding my mental health and fragility. You will admit, on the record, that these were fabricated to facilitate a forced asset transfer. That's a high bar for our PR team, Elena. The second bar is higher, I continued. You will turn over the logs from the Hyatt security suite from the night of the gala. The full logs. Not the ones Mark edited. I want the footage of Julian Sterling and Mark Vance discussing the insurance payout before I was even put in that hallway. And the third? Thorne asked, his voice barely a whisper. The third, I said, a cold smile touching my lips, is that you will provide the FBI with the backdoor access to Mark's Vesper accounts that Julian has been hiding. I know he has the key, Thorne. He's been waiting for the right moment to seize the funds for himself. You give that to the feds, and I'll give you the IP. I knew they would do it. The board didn't care about Julian anymore. They cared about staying out of federal prison. In the world of high finance, loyalty is just a debt that hasn't been called in yet. I hung up and looked at the clock. I had one more meeting. This one wasn't corporate. It was personal. I met Sarah in a park 3 blocks from the precinct. She looked like a ghost. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her eyes were sunken, and the senior analyst bravado had been replaced by the raw, jagged edges of a woman who knew she was the next sacrifice. You won, Elena, she said as I sat on the bench beside her. She didn't look at me. Is that what you wanted? To see us all in the dirt. I didn't want anything from you, Sarah, I said. I didn't even know you existed until you started wearing my jewelry and sleeping in my bed. You were a variable I hadn't accounted for, but you were never the goal. They're going to arrest me, she sobbed. Mark told me the feds are looking at the notary stamps. He said he'd protect me, but he's not even answering his phone. Mark can't protect a house of cards in a hurricane, Sarah, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small blue envelope. This is a referral to a defense attorney, a good one. One who doesn't work for Sterling. She looked at the envelope like it was a bomb. Why? Because you were a tool he used, just like me, but you have something I don't have anymore. What's that? A clean record. If you go to the FBI tonight before Thorne makes his deal and you give them the original documents Mark had you sign before you knew about the fraud, you might walk away with a suspended sentence. I wasn't doing it out of kindness. I was doing it because Sarah's testimony was the final nail in Mark's coffin. I needed her to be the one to tell the story of the hidden wife from the perspective of the woman who was supposed to replace her. It made the betrayal more visceral, more public. Go, Sarah, I said. Don't wait for him to call. He's already forgotten your name. I watched her walk away, clutching the blue envelope. The stakes were now clear. Mark was trapped in a dark house with no money and no allies. Julian was trapped in a glass tower with a board of directors who were about to sell him to the highest bidder. And I was in the center, the only person who knew exactly how the collapse would look. I returned to my hotel and looked at the silver suitcases I had taken from the house. I opened them. Inside weren't just the clothes Mark had packed for my commitment. Inside were the things he had stolen from me over the years. My college diploma, my grandmother's locket, my first legal brief. He had packed them because he wanted to keep the trophies of the woman he had conquered. I took the diploma and set it on the desk. I took the locket and put it around my neck. The final conditions were set. The emotional stillness before the climax was so heavy I could almost hear my own heartbeat. They thought they were winning. Mark thought he could beg his way back into my life. Julian thought he could buy my silence. The board thought they could trade my IP for their freedom. They all thought they were the ones making the deals. But as I sat there, the light of the setting sun hitting the locket, I realized that the only person who had ever truly owned anything in this story was the woman they all tried to hide. The stage was set for the public collapse. And I was the only one who knew where the trapdoor was. They thought they were winning. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with the soft, persistent hum of 1,000 servers and the clinical glare of television cameras. Thursday morning, the day the Sterling-Vance merger was supposed to be the financial event of the decade. Instead, it was a crime scene. I arrived at the Sterling building at 10 a.m. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't using the service entrance. I walked through the front doors, the heels of my shoes echoing on the marble like a countdown. I wore a tailored black suit, sharp, severe, and final. The lobby was a hive of chaos. Reporters were huddled near the elevators, and men in dark windbreakers with FBI, emblazoned in yellow across their backs, were hauling boxes out of the private lifts. I took the elevator to the 64th floor. When the doors opened, the silence was jarring. The phalanx of lawyers was gone. The receptionists were gone. Only Julian Sterling remained, sitting in his petrified wood chair, staring out at the city he no longer owned. Beside him stood Mark. Julian had called him. In a last-ditch effort to salvage the unsalvageable, the two monsters had crawled back into the same hole. Mark looked like he had aged 20 years in 3 days. He was wearing a suit that was too big for him now, his face sallow and twitching. "You came," Julian said. He didn't turn around. His voice was a hollow shell of the command it once held. "I told you I would," I said, walking to the center of the room. Mark lunged toward me, his hands outstretched as if to grab me, but he stopped 3 feet away. There was a look in my eyes he had never seen before, the look of a person who has already buried you. "Elena, please," Mark whispered. "Julian says we can still fix it, the board. They haven't gone to the feds yet. If you give the IP back now, we can claim the whole Vesper thing was a security test. We can say you were in on it. We can all walk away." I looked at Mark. "You still don't get it, do you? You're still trying to write a script where you're the hero who just got lost." "Mark, there is no more script. I've already burned the theater." I turned to Julian. "The board didn't take your deal, Julian. They took mine. 5 minutes ago, the FBI received the Hyatt logs, the unredacted ones. They're watching the footage right now, the part where you tell Mark that Elena is expendable as long as the insurance claim for the stolen algorithms is filed by a family member." Julian finally turned his chair. His face was a mask of gray defeat. "I underestimated you. I thought you were the asset. I didn't realize you were the auditor." "I was both," I said. Suddenly, the glass doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was the press. I had invited them. Not as a scorned wife looking for a headline, but as the majority shareholder of the trust that now controlled every scrap of Sterling's intellectual property. The flashes from the cameras were blinding. "Mrs. Vance," a reporter shouted, "is it true you filed a whistleblower report against your husband and Julian Sterling?" "Mrs. Vance, what about the allegations of your mental instability?" I stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. I didn't shout. I didn't point fingers. I waited for the room to go quiet. "I am Elena Vance," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I am a member of the State Bar, the architect of the Sterling algorithms, and for 7 years, I was the woman my husband tried to hide in a service hallway so he could sell my work as his own." I looked directly into the lens of the lead camera. "There is no instability here. There is only the truth. Mark Vance is an identity thief who embezzled millions from his own partners. Julian Sterling is a conspirator who facilitated that theft to commit insurance fraud. Everything they built was built on the assumption that I would stay silent." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I hit play. Mark's voice filled the room. "Elena? Please. She's probably sitting in that service hallway right now, crying into her hands like a good little martyr. She'll have the clothes on her back and a very confusing divorce settlement." The room went deathly silent. Mark looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Julian just closed his eyes. "The martyr is finished," I said. At that moment, the FBI agents entered the room. They didn't go for me. They went straight for Mark and Julian. I watched as the silver handcuffs were snapped around Mark's wrists, the same wrists I used to hold when I thought we were a team. I watched Julian be led away, his head bowed, his legacy turning to ash in the light of a dozen camera flashes. Mark looked back at me one last time as they pulled him toward the door. "Elena," he screamed. "You'll have nothing. Without me, you're nothing." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I watched them be led into the elevators. I watched the doors close. I watched the light on the panel drop from 64 to the lobby. The public collapse was complete. The monsters were gone. The perfect life was officially, legally, and publicly dead. The reporters tried to swarm me again, but I held up a hand. "The rest of my statement will be handled by my counsel," I said. "I have a flight to catch." "To Italy?" a reporter joked. "No," I said, a genuine smile, the first one in years touching my face. "To a place where I don't have to be the wife anymore." I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look at the petrified wood desk. I didn't look at the city skyline. I walked past the service hallway where this had all begun. I didn't even pause. But as I reached the lobby and felt the fresh air hit my face, I realized something. Mark was gone. Julian was gone. The money was mine. But that wasn't the end. Because justice isn't just about the people you lock away. It's about the person you find when the smoke finally clears. But that wasn't the end. The world moves on, with terrifying speed. 3 weeks after the collapse of the Sterling-Vance merger, the headlines had already shifted. The corporate coup of the century was now a small blurb on page 6, replaced by a fresh political scandal and a new tech IPO. People have short memories for other people's tragedies. I was sitting on the deck of a small, minimalist cabin overlooking the coast of Maine. No gold leaf, no marble. Just salt air, the sound of the Atlantic, and a stack of legal documents that had nothing to do with me. The normal life I had fought so hard to curate was now a matter of public record. Our house in the suburbs had been seized and sold to pay back the creditors Mark had defrauded. Sarah had taken the deal I offered. She was serving 3 years of probation and had been barred from the financial industry for life. Last I heard, she was working in a boutique in a different state, her senior analyst dreams buried under the weight of a felony record. Mark's mother was safe. I had used a portion of the trust to settle her medical debts and move her into a facility where Mark, or whatever his real name was, could never find her again. I looked at the newspaper on the table. There was a photo of Julian Sterling entering a federal courthouse. He looked old. The granite face had finally cracked. He was facing 15 years for his role in the insurance collusion. And Mark? Mark was in a federal holding facility in Pennsylvania. Without a real identity and with the FBI's forensic team dismantling the Vesper accounts, he was a man without a country. His lawyers had tried to plead for diminished capacity, ironically using the same medical falsifications he had created for me. The judge didn't buy it. I hadn't visited him. I didn't need the closure of a face-to-face. My closure was the silence of my phone. If you're listening to this and you're waiting for a sorry, stop waiting. People like Mark don't say sorry because they don't believe they did anything wrong, they only believe they got caught. Your healing doesn't start when they apologize. It starts when you realize their opinion of you no longer carries the weight of a feather. I spent my days walking the shoreline. I watched the tide come in and erase the footprints I'd left in the sand. It was a metaphor that felt a little too on the nose, but I didn't care. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't being managed. I wasn't being protected. I was just Elena. On a Tuesday afternoon, a black town car pulled up the long, gravel driveway. I didn't panic. I didn't hide. I simply set my book down and waited. Marcus Thorne, the board's chief counsel, stepped out. He looked uncomfortable in the rustic setting, his polished Oxfords crunching on the pine needles. "Mrs. Vance," he said, nodding toward me. "Mr. Thorne. I assume you're not here to offer me another settlement." "The Sterling Group is no more," he said, joining me at the railing. "The assets have been liquidated. The board has dissolved. But there is the matter of the trust." "The IP," I said. "Yes. Several firms are interested in buying the algorithms. They're offering a sum that would make you one of the wealthiest private citizens in the country. They want to know your price." I looked out at the water. I thought about the hours I had spent in that basement, ghostwriting Mark's success. I thought about the nights I'd spent crying in the service hallway because I thought I wasn't enough for the world of high finance. The price isn't money, Marcus, I said. He frowned. Then what is it? I want the patents released into the public domain. I want the technology to be open source. If Mark and Julian wanted to kill for this code, then I'm going to make sure it's free for everyone to use. No one gets to own it. Especially not a man in a suit. Thorne stared at me like I had grown a second head. You're throwing away hundreds of millions of dollars. For what? Spite? For freedom, I said. If I sell it, I'm just another player in their game. If I give it away, the game ends. I'm not a player anymore, Marcus. I'm the person who walked away from the table. He left an hour later, looking baffled. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, a cheap one from the local grocery store. It tasted better than the vintage champagne Mark used to buy. I sat in the dark and watched the lighthouse across the bay. Its rhythmic pulse was a reminder that even in the deepest dark, there's a signal for those who know how to look for it. I picked up my old law degree, the one I'd taken from the silver suitcase. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. I wasn't going to Italy. I wasn't going back to the suburbs. I was going to open a firm. Not a corporate one. A firm for the assets, for the wives who were being erased. For the partners whose names were being left off the contracts. For the people who were told they were fragile until they started to believe it. I realized then that the revenge wasn't the collapse of the Sterling Group. It wasn't Mark in a jumpsuit. The revenge was the fact that I was sitting here, breathing, thinking, and planning, while they were still trying to figure out where they went wrong. They thought they had hidden me. They thought they had buried me. They forgot that a seed is buried, too. I stood up and walked inside, closing the door on the cold Atlantic wind. The aftermath was over. The life was just beginning. I picked up my pen and wrote the first word on a clean sheet of paper. Elena. They forgot that a seed is buried, too.